Kara Nichols was born on May 20th, 1993 in Chicago, Illinois, the middle child in a tight-knit family with an older brother, Terry, and a younger sister whose name remains private. And from the start, she had this spark, this magnetic charm that drew people in, the kind of energy that made her impossible to ignore. Her dad, Paul, a businessman, and her mom, Julia, kept her grounded, instilling values and expectations. But Kara had this restless streak, a curiosity and creativity that often got her into trouble. At 13, she was caught shoplifting and had to do community service. And during her sophomore year of high school, a deep depression hit after the family dog died, leaving her resistant to counseling, refusing a medication, and eventually turning to drugs as a way to cope. A pattern that would haunt her for years, even as she tried to chase her dreams in modeling and makeup, a world she fell in love with, imagining herself on a runway or in front of a camera, escaping into a space where her energy and charm could shine. A girl who, despite the chaos of her adolescence, still carried this bright, stubborn drive to carve out her own path, even if that path was messy, full of mistakes, and would one day lead her into danger. Kara Nichols' teenage years were far from easy, and if you think high school is just awkward cafeteria moments and pop quizzes, think again. This was a girl juggling depression, loss, and an early introduction to the darker sides of life. After the death of the family dog during her sophomore year, Kara spiraled. Her parents, Paul and Julia, tried to help, offering counseling and medication, but she refused, shutting the door on traditional support like it was a cage she didn't belong in. Instead, she turned to substances, first experimenting with alcohol, then marijuana, and eventually moving on to harder drugs like heroin. The thrill of rebellion, the escape from relentless anxiety, and the numbing effect of the drugs became a dangerous cocktail that she relied on to survive the weight of her emotions. School became increasingly difficult. She transferred to an alternative high school in Colorado Springs, a move designed to give her more flexibility, but also signaling how much her life had already deviated from the normal teenage path. Despite the chaos, Kara retained this fierce intelligence and creativity. She threw herself into projects, loved experimenting with makeup, and dreamt of modeling. But her ambitions constantly collided with her addiction, leaving her stuck between who she wanted to be and what she needed to survive. At just 17, Kara made a decision that would shape the next chapter of her life. She started working as an escort, navigating a world that most adults feared, often putting herself at risk in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. But there was a method to her madness. The money she earned funded her habit, yes, but it also bought her independence, gave her a sense of control in a life that often felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She was careful, smart, and cautious. She learned quickly to manage clients, protect herself, and stay under the radar, all while chasing the dream of modeling. She uploaded portfolios of herself online, experimenting with angles, lighting, and expressions, taking her craft seriously, even as her nights blurred into dangerous encounters. Kara wasn't reckless. She was strategic. She understood the risks, but for her, survival sometimes meant walking the line between danger and opportunity, using what she had to carve out a future that, at moments, felt impossible to reach. Despite her work as an escort, Kara never abandoned her dreams. She had this relentless pull toward fashion and modeling. She spent hours practicing poses in front of mirrors, sketching ideas, and experimenting with makeup techniques. She uploaded photos to platforms aimed at helping models connect with photographers, describing herself as responsible, ambitious, and serious about her craft. Modeling wasn't just a job, it was her identity, her escape from the pressures of addiction, a glimpse at a life she could almost touch if she just kept pushing. Her mother, Julia, recognized this duality and said modeling allowed Kara to slip into a persona that wasn't defined by her struggles, a different Kara, one in control, one who could shine. Even as she pursued her career, Kara's personal life remained a battleground. Her addiction made sustaining relationships nearly impossible. Friendships were fleeting, often strained by her mood swings, her need for substances, or the unpredictable lifestyle that came with her work. Romantic relationships were similarly complicated. She was drawn to people who mirrored her chaos, but also frustrated by their inability to help her escape it. By her late teens, Kara's life was a balancing act, a constant negotiation between the allure of modeling, the necessity of her escort work, and the insidious pull of her drug habit. Her highs were exhilarating, getting a modeling job, seeing herself in professional photos, but the lows were devastating, leaving her anxious, isolated, and haunted by the reality that addiction could take everything she loved if she let it. In 2012, Kara turned 19, and life threw a series of sharp curves. Her substance use forced her to quit her waitressing job, her main source of income outside escorting, leaving her financially strained. That summer, she returned to her parents' home in Chicago, a move that should have offered stability, but instead highlighted just how far she had drifted. Paul and Julia tried to intervene, convincing her to enter rehab. Kara agreed, but her stay was short-lived. She struggled to follow the program's rigid rules, bristled under the constant supervision, and eventually was expelled. Even in this failure, though, there was determination. She wanted to fix herself, wanted to escape the grip of heroin, wanted to take control of her life. But the tools at her disposal and the weight of years of addiction made the climb almost impossible. By August 2012, Kara made the choice to leave Chicago and move back to Colorado Springs. She sought solace among friends, and though she maintained regular contact with her brother Terry, there was still a sense of isolation. Addiction had a way of distorting reality, and even when she was around people who cared for her, Kara carried a private burden that few could see. She still pursued modeling, taking small gigs, photographing herself, and attempting to maintain the illusion of a normal young woman chasing her dreams. But every step forward seemed to collide with the past she couldn't escape: her drug use, the fear of relapse, and the knowledge that her choices put her in constant danger. Her last days in October 2012 would prove that no amount of preparation could shield her from the dangers that lurked around the edges of her world. On October 9th, she called Terry, saying she was heading to Denver for a modeling job, a detail that would later become a central thread in the investigation into her disappearance. It seemed routine, a typical Kara move, chasing an opportunity, hustling the way Kara always did. But beneath that simple explanation, a storm was quietly gathering. That night, she disappeared. Terry tried to reach her over the next couple of days, but every call went unanswered, every text left unread, and a gnawing worry began to creep in. By October 11th, the concern had grown too heady to ignore, and Terry went to her rented room, a step he rarely took because it had been a while since he'd checked in. That's when he met Jeremy Swopey and Archie Escobedo, her roommates, who told him she had left for Denver. The answer, simple on the surface, felt hollow to Terry. He knew Kara's habits, her careful nature, the way she kept her life organized even amid chaos. Her makeup kit, her phone charger, and $300 in cash, everything normally with her, were left behind. That raised immediate red flags. This wasn't the Kara he knew. Something was off. Her parents, Paul and Julia, flew to Colorado, their worry amplifying by the hour. Every corner of her room screamed absence, empty, tidy, but glaringly incomplete. Still, despite the mounting concern, it took until October 14th for the family to report Kara officially missing. When they did, they brought the full weight of her story to the authorities: her history with drugs, her brief rehab stint, and her unconventional lifestyle. Yet, the police response was frustratingly slow, tinged with skepticism. After all, Kara was an adult, they said, capable of making her own choices. They suggested she might just be taking time off, chasing modeling gigs, or disappearing to handle personal matters. For Paul and Julia, that indifference was devastating. Every hour without answers amplified the terror that something far worse had happened. Meanwhile, the digital world added layers to the investigation. In December 2012, a photo of Kara surfaced on an adult content and escort service website, immediately sparking hope and dread in investigators. Could she have resurfaced on her own? Was she in trouble? An anonymous tip suggested a sighting in Las Vegas, but every lead dissolved under scrutiny. The photo on the website turned out to be a case of identity theft. Someone had used her likeness without her knowledge. Kara, who had already lived a life balancing modeling, substance use, and escort work, now faced a new threat, being falsely represented, her name pulled into a world of speculation she had never entered. As months passed, Detective Tammy Tadlock took over the investigation in February 2013. By that point, the case wasn't just about Kara. 2 other young models had vanished before her, both of them users of the same online platform Kara had leveraged for her modeling portfolio. Suddenly, what seemed like an isolated disappearance turned into a potential pattern, a dark web of missing women tied to a single digital platform. Investigators scrambled to piece together connections to see if Kara's disappearance was an accident, a planned disappearance, or something far more sinister. Tammy discovered an escort ad dated October 9, 2012, the exact day Kara vanished, featuring her photo in lingerie. The ad led to new leads, opening a window into a side of cell phone records revealed repeated contact with a man named Joel Hollendorfer, a 37-year-old with a long criminal record, including theft, harassment, and convictions connected to drugs and escort services. Joel's account was initially smooth, almost casual. He claimed that he had never met Kara in person, that any phone calls and texts were digital-only, pseudonymous conversations. But as Tammy peeled back the layers, geolocation data from Kara's phone told a different story. She had been tracked near the intersection of Goodman Road and Black Forest Road at midnight on the night of October 9th, an area Joel frequented on the way to his parents' house. The trail of digital breadcrumbs suggested proximity and timing that contradicted Joel's denials, raising the first major flags in the investigation. The detective also pieced together Kara's movements earlier in the day. She had spent time with 2 friends, both brunettes, one of whom cooperated fully with authorities, recounting every detail of their hours together. The other friend, however, vanished into the background, leaving a gap that frustrated investigators. Meanwhile, the digital world seemed intent on complicating the case. New escort ads featuring Kara's image began appearing months after her disappearance, all false, and investigators had to sift through each to confirm whether she was involved. None were real. Yet the proliferation of these posts amplified public confusion, feeding rumors and speculation about Kara's fate, while the trail went cold in several directions. In October 2014, over 2 years after Kara's disappearance, Tammy's relentless investigation bore fruit. Authorities obtained a search warrant for Joel Hollendorfer's parents' property. Ground-penetrating radar scans revealed soil anomalies, areas where disturbances suggested burial activity, but initially they were dismissed as old horse graves, a common feature on the rural property. Then, through conversations with Joel's mother, Betty, the focus shifted to a new section of the land, accessible to Joel, which had been undisturbed by previous searches. Bloodhounds were deployed across the Green Acres property, sniffing every corner, until all 4 dogs converged on the same recently disturbed patch of earth. The presence of human remains was confirmed, and Kara's body was painstakingly exhumed, sent for forensic testing, and finally identified. Once the physical evidence surfaced, the investigation took a new, sharper direction. Joel was interviewed extensively. Initially, he admitted speaking with Kara in October 2012, but insisted she had never arrived at any meeting they arranged. He claimed she might have followed him home intending to rob him, but maintained he had no direct contact. Over time, inconsistencies in his story became clear. He shifted explanations, first denying any knowledge of a burial site, then implicating his mother when questioned about soil disturbances. While Joel attempted to frame his role as incidental or accidental, investigators meticulously pieced together her last known movements, confirming the overlap with his own. Perhaps the most pivotal breakthrough came in 2022 when authorities located Christina Hollendorfer, Joel's ex-wife, in Virginia. Christina had initially been uncooperative, but eventually revealed a confession Joel made in 2014. He admitted to accidentally killing a sex worker, Kara, by suffocating her during a sexual encounter in October 2012. He described how Joel buried the body on his parents' property above a horse grave and later confessed the act to his father. Christina's account, years after the fact, provided the missing link that tied the digital trail, geolocation data, and human evidence together. It was a chilling revelation. Kara's disappearance had been anything but random, and the one person with the closest access to her on the night she vanished was also the one responsible for her death. By combining forensic evidence, digital data, and insider testimony, law enforcement reconstructed the timeline: Kara's last phone call to Terry, her interactions that day with friends, her online activity, the path she took that night near Joel's habitual route, and finally, the location of her remains. Each piece fit together to form a clear, if grim, picture. Kara Nichols had been lured or placed into a dangerous situation where she encountered Joel, leading to her untimely death. The investigation, painstaking and prolonged, was a testament to the convergence of modern technology and classic detective work: geolocation, digital forensics, witness interviews, and traditional searches combined to unravel a disappearance that left families and communities desperate for answers. Even after locating Kara's remains, investigators were aware the story was far from over. Joel's motivations, the exact circumstances of the encounter, and his responsibility for covering up her death were all matters to be explored in court. But the disappearance itself, once shrouded in uncertainty and speculation, had finally been solved, revealing a shocking truth behind months of unanswered questions, dead-end leads, and false hopes. The courtroom was tense from the very first day, charged with the weight of a decade-long investigation and the collective grief of Kara Nichols' family and friends. Over 10 years after her disappearance, the trial of Joel Hollendorfer finally began on June 10, 2023, and the atmosphere inside the packed court was heavy with anticipation. Reporters, families, and former friends of Kara filled the seats, while lawyers on both sides prepared for a battle that would dissect every last detail of that fateful night in October 2012. The prosecution opened with a stark reminder of the stakes, displaying Kara's high school graduation photo, her bright smile frozen in time, followed by images of the garbage bags in which her remains had been found. The contrast between the life she had lived and the violent secrecy of her death hit the courtroom like a physical blow, grabbing attention and setting the tone. This was a life stolen, a tragedy that demanded scrutiny. Detective Tammy Tadlock was the first major witness, recounting the painstaking investigation from the early days of Kara's disappearance through the painstaking digital tracking, the search of Joel's family property, and the eventual recovery of Kara's remains. She detailed the phone records, the geolocation data, and the sequence of events pieced together from friends' accounts, showing the jury how technology and old-fashioned detective work converged to reveal the truth. Her testimony was precise, methodical, yet it carried an undercurrent of urgency, reflecting the years spent chasing elusive leads while a family waited for answers. Each timeline, each location, each interaction she outlined reinforced the image of a young woman trapped in a situation that began with deception and ended in violence. Christina Hollendorfer, Joel's ex-wife, took the stand next, a mixture of fear and resolve written across her face. She described her unstable marriage to Joel, marked by separations, reconciliations, and confrontations fueled by drugs and poor judgment. Then came the chilling confession. Joel had admitted to her that he killed a sex worker, Kara Nichols, by suffocating during a sexual encounter in October 2012 and buried her above a horse grave on his parents' property. Later, he confessed to his father, believing the man deserved to know, and even suggested his father's death from a heart attack was somehow connected to the stress of learning about Kara's murder. Christina's account, years after the fact, provided the missing link that tied the digital trail, geolocation data, and human evidence together. It was a chilling revelation. Kara's disappearance had been anything but random, and the one person with the closest access to her on the night she vanished was also the one responsible for her death. By combining forensic evidence, digital data, and insider testimony, law enforcement reconstructed the timeline. Kara's last phone call to Terry, her interactions that day with friends, her online activity, the path she took that night near Joel's habitual route, and finally, the location of her remains. Each piece fit together to form a clear, if grim, picture. Kara Nichols had been lured or placed into a dangerous situation where she encountered Joel, leading to her untimely death. The investigation, painstaking and prolonged, was a testament to the convergence of modern technology and classic detective work. Geolocation, digital forensics, witness interviews, and traditional searches combined to unravel a disappearance that left families and communities desperate for answers. Even after locating Kara's remains, investigators were aware the story was far from over. Joel's motivations, the exact circumstances of the encounter, and his responsibility for covering up her death were all matters to be explored in court. But the disappearance itself, once shrouded in uncertainty and speculation, had finally been solved, revealing a shocking truth behind months of unanswered questions, dead-end leads, and false hopes. The courtroom was tense from the very first day, charged with the weight of a decade-long investigation and the collective grief of Kara Nichols' family and friends. Over 10 years after her disappearance, the trial of Joel Hollendorfer finally began on June 10, 2023, and the atmosphere inside the packed court was heavy with anticipation. Reporters, families, and former friends of Kara filled the seats, while lawyers on both sides prepared for a battle that would dissect every last detail of that fateful night in October 2012. The prosecution opened with a stark reminder of the stakes, displaying Kara's high school graduation photo, her bright smile frozen in time, followed by images of the garbage bags in which her remains had been found. The contrast between the life she had lived and the violent secrecy of her death hit the courtroom like a physical blow, grabbing attention and setting the tone. This was a life stolen. A tragedy that demanded scrutiny. Detective Tammy Tadlock was the first major witness, recounting the painstaking investigation from the early days of Kara's disappearance through the painstaking digital tracking, the search of Joel's family property, and the eventual recovery of Kara's remains. She detailed the phone records, the geolocation data, and the sequence of events pieced together from friends' accounts, showing the jury how technology and old-fashioned detective work converged to reveal the truth. Her testimony was precise, methodical, yet it carried an undercurrent of urgency, reflecting the years spent chasing elusive leads while a family waited for answers. Each timeline, each location, each interaction she outlined reinforced the image of a young woman trapped in a situation that began with deception and ended in violence. Christina Hollendorfer, Joel's ex-wife, took the stand next, a mixture of fear and resolve written across her face. She described her unstable marriage to Joel, marked by separations, reconciliations, and confrontations fueled by drugs and poor judgment. Then came the chilling confession. Joel had admitted to her that he had killed a sex worker, Kara Nichols, by suffocation during an encounter in October 2012 and buried her above a horse grave on the family property. She recounted how he later confessed to his father, believing the man deserved to know, and how he even suggested his father's death from a heart attack was somehow connected to the stress of learning about Kara's murder. Christina's testimony was precise, methodical, yet it carried an undercurrent of urgency, reflecting the years spent chasing elusive leads while a family waited for answers. Each timeline, each location, each interaction she outlined reinforced the image of a young woman trapped in a situation that began with deception and ended in violence. Forensic experts followed, providing chilling insights into Kara's final moments. The pathologist explained that while her body contained high levels of heroin, the amount was inconsistent with a fatal overdose given her history with the drug. This meant her habitual drug use could not alone explain her death. He discussed how her physical condition, affected by drugs, might have contributed to her vulnerability, but did not absolve Joel from responsibility. Other experts included the volunteers and geologists who had aided in the search of Joel's parents' property back in 2014. They described using ground-penetrating radar to identify soil anomalies, noting that initial scans had been complicated by prior animal burials, and how the convergence of bloodhounds ultimately led investigators to the site of Kara's body. Their testimony reinforced the painstaking and careful nature of the investigation, showing the jury that what had seemed like luck was actually methodical police and volunteer work. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of Joel's intentions, arguing that his interactions with Kara were fueled not by coincidence, but by premeditated opportunity, anger from personal grievances, and a pattern of poor judgment. They suggested Joel's repeated attempts to contact Christina on the day he met Kara indicated emotional volatility, which escalated during the encounter with Kara and culminated in her death by suffocation. The prosecution repeatedly emphasized that Kara's death could not be explained as an accidental overdose. The timeline of her drug use and the evidence of physical concealment pointed squarely toward deliberate action. They urged the jury to focus on Joel's choices, the sequence of his movements, and his concealment of the body, all actions inconsistent with a mere tragic accident. The defense, meanwhile, framed Joel's actions as a combination of tragic misjudgment, emotional instability, and poor decisions under duress. They acknowledged that he had a role in Kara's death, but insisted it was accidental, a fatal consequence of consensual sexual activity involving drugs. They argued there was no concrete proof he intended to kill her, pointing to the pathologist's testimony to suggest a heroin-induced impairment could have caused the fatality without malicious intent. The defense attempted to shift attention from Joel's intent to the risk of an overdose, carefully emphasizing that while Joel's actions afterward, burying the body, concealing evidence, were wrong, they did not necessarily prove premeditation. Over the course of the trial, a total of 14 witnesses contributed to the narrative, each layer adding complexity to the case. Kara's roommates, Jeremy Swappy and Archie Escobedo, recounted her last known movements and calls, establishing timelines that countered Joel's statements. Family members, including Terry and Julia Nichols, provided context about Kara's personality, struggles, and independence, emphasizing that she had not vanished willingly and that her disappearance was out of character. Friends who knew of her sex work confirmed she never met Joel in a professional capacity before that night, and their testimony bolstered the timeline pieced together from phone and geolocation records. The court also heard from law enforcement officials involved in the long investigation, bridging the gap between early confusion and the eventual discovery of her remains. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom was heavy with tension. The prosecution reminded the jury of the human cost. The life of a vibrant young woman ended far too soon, her final days clouded by manipulation and predation. They stressed that the evidence showed Joel acted with recklessness and malice, not negligence, and that his concealment of the crime further underscored his culpability. The defense countered, urging the jury to consider Joel's lack of intent to kill and the possibility that the death occurred accidentally. They framed it as a series of mistakes and unfortunate circumstances, urging leniency and reminding jurors of the absence of direct evidence proving premeditation. 12 days into the trial, after nearly 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Joel Hollendorfer was found guilty of manslaughter. The decision stunned the courtroom. Kara's family had hoped for a harsher conviction, seeing the deliberate concealment of her body and the decades of deceit as aggravating factors. Julia Nichols' testimony, heartfelt and raw, expressed the family's disappointment, underscoring their belief that the jury had failed to fully grasp the crime's severity. Nevertheless, the judge, acknowledging the jury's findings, considered Joel's extensive criminal history as aggravating, setting the stage for a sentence that reflected both the law and the precedent of prior offenses. On August 31, 2023, Joel was sentenced to 24 years in prison. The sentence brought a mix of relief and frustration to Kara's family and friends. Relief that Joel would face a long-term incarceration, frustration that justice had been tempered by the limitations of the legal system and the challenge of proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Julia Nichols, while appreciative that aggravating factors were considered, expressed disappointment that the sentence did not fully reflect the gravity of the crime or the suffering caused by Joel's concealment of Kara's body for years. The family vowed to remain vigilant at every parole hearing, determined to ensure Joel would serve the maximum sentence possible, and that Kara's story and her memory would not be overshadowed or misrepresented. Throughout the trial, the media coverage often sensationalized Kara's history as a sex worker and struggles with addiction, which frustrated her family. They emphasized repeatedly that her choices did not justify her murder or the trauma inflicted on her loved ones by the concealment of her body for years. Instead, they wanted Kara remembered for her creativity, her charm, and the vibrant life she lived before it was cut short. The trial, while legally concluded, was also a stark lesson in the intersections of personal vulnerability, predation, and the painstakingly slow process of justice. In the end, justice was served in part, but the pain and loss remained very real for those who had loved Kara Nichols, leaving a legacy of caution and the reminder that behind every crime are lives forever altered.